concept for the Heriot Ward University, much like all of Asia and probably most of Malaysia, most of us design for only 10% of landscape. That's usually what the requirement is. And we feel that tomorrow's future is all about incorporating a lot more landscape, and that the building becomes less a part of the context, but that the landscape becomes more of the context. And so in the future, we think that 80% will be more landscape, and the buildings will become smaller in footprint, or will basically be more green. And we think that this will become the ecological urbanism, which will start and emerge as a matter of necessity that we are going to see because of how we are growing with 7 billion people on Earth. So with that idea, the client actually comes from Edinburgh. And Edinburgh actually, despite sort of thinking that the whole of Edinburgh around the sides is quite green, has only about 4.6% of green within the city itself. Kuala Lumpur has about 5% green and seems to become less and less as we start to develop and as we start to cut down a lot more of the trees. Singapore, on the other hand, has something like 9% green despite of its urbanism that has happened. And I think it's a conscious effort to make more parks and green areas and increase the density, and I understand they're looking at sort of building underground as well. In Putrajaya, we're quite lucky. When they set it as a green city, they said that it would become the green city, and they set aside a higher ratio of about 38% green. When I mean green, it's not just about the planting on tops of balconies, but in terms of the footprint. So this is Putrajaya, and this is our site. Our site is actually a new site in the sense that this was a palm oil location and was cleared, and all the waterways there are man-made. And we're very lucky because the site is quite long, it's 250 meters long, and there's a height limit of no more than 5 stories on the site. In terms of building orientation, the site is north and south orientation, so that was a benefit to us in this sort of tropical climate to build. And that's the site itself on the waterfront. So it has a big promenade and a big waterfront view, but also that we knew that the master planning also entailed that buildings behind will become residential, and they will stand about 14 stories to 18 stories behind us. And we didn't want to quite block their views to the water edge by creating a building that was another 12 or stories high. So the concept for this building, we call it the peeling of the earth. And our concept in Malay calls it Menimba Ilmu. Menimba Ilmu is to seek knowledge and to find knowledge. And we wanted to see that we created a series of buildings under an earth mound as a sort of hidden treasures of knowledge. So we have a green field that was on our site. We lifted up that green field and we tucked the buildings underneath that building so that we created a sort of continuum greenscape, which is walkable right up to the top. And so there would be this green continuum on the waterfront edge, and also that the buildings behind would actually be looking down into a greenscape versus a building rooftop, especially when it's residential. The building is built into 2 parts. So in the first phase, we have actually built 3/4 of the curve of the arc. And we have another quarter to go. In the brief, we were to house 3,000 students. At the moment, we actually house 4,000, and in the second phase, up to a capacity of 6,000 students. So that's quite a lot of students in one campus. This is the rooftop of the site, and what it enables us to do is basically create a greenery around the site. This is it when it just first completed at about 67% of green area. So this is the future development that you will see around the site. So planning for the future, we don't know. All we know is the buildings and the typologies of the buildings, residential mixed developments that will happen behind our site. And this was our concept when we first gave it, and of course there's been some development since the time we put in the concept. The concept was a series of buildings below the green roof going over the top. So in terms of the site, that's where it is in Putrajaya. It's next to the convention center. There were some requirements in terms of remaining some views from the streetscape that was given to us. So all the roads that are coming into had to be clear views to the waterfront. So we had to create these axes that you see, these view corridors through the building. And taking that as an idea, we began to build the building into a series of smaller blocks and individual blocks below the roof. So this is in terms of planning, and you can see that there are individual blocks, and in the middle there's an internal street. So the internal street is shaded, and there's cross ventilation at all the spines that you see and the breaks that you come through. So there's cross ventilation from the water side. And the thing about being near a water body, it creates itself cross flows of air, because the water and the land basically heat up quite differently. So these axes that you see in bricks in the building open up. And this was the original planning of the entire campus in terms of building it. At the waterfront, we basically have commercial esplanade, so all that you see there on the waterfront edge are all the facilities for the students. And then on top of that are the sort of zones for the learning centers. And above that, as you can see in purple, that's the internal street linking and staircases that take you between floors. So the building steps up from 2, 3, 4 to 5 stories. In the middle, so there's a gradual increase going to the center. And then, of course, the administration and the M&E facilities are on top of the building itself. At concept, we had a circular ring in the beginning, and of course that was actually taken out in terms of value engineering. But that still became the nucleus and hub, because that's the main entry, and you will see all the main facilities of the administration, the student center around this main entry point that you come into the building. These were our conceptual ideas, that the linkages between the classrooms are naturally ventilated, and they would have some breakout spaces. And this was our conceptual idea of the street promenade on the waterfront itself being more open, and it's basically open to the public. So it's a campus on the base floor that's open to the public. This is the end result of the building. So that's the main entry coming into the building, and the vertical lifts take you up to the floors. But also internally, you can see the start of the streets. The glass lifts here are for the public, taking them up with a skylight at the top. And then these are the actual building from the land side. That's also from the land side, and the main entry coming up. We stepped up one level to allow for a sub-basement parking, which is also naturally ventilated from the waterfront edge. And this is some of the learning spaces. This is the actual connector later on, when we will build the building to come down to the other side. This is the view from the top level, top end. And this is our future phase 2 later on to actually complete the arc. This is the internal bridges that go across. This is at ground floor. So it's a very simple, economical building that was built, but it was quite a daring building. This is the rooftop edge, as you can see. And then below that is where the M&E services are, and you can see the skylight and the walkway coming through. These are, the thing about tropical design is that we have to be mindful about water penetration into the building, Once we have big roofs and cross ventilation, we have to allow for the circulation. This has become a real events background to the design. On the waterfront, they hold
I'm
quite a
afraid
lot of
time is running out.
Okay. And just in terms of the sustainability components, these are some of the features. We are collecting all the water for irrigating the entire...
I'm sorry, we have to stop.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting concept. You mentioned earlier initially that you saved a lot of the land to keep it green, and as I understood, that was the rooftop. So, is it accessible?
Totally accessible, right from the bottom to walk up, or up the lift and to be on top.
So we've seen a lot of images of the building, not so much of what's actually happening on the roof.
That's the roof?
That's the roof. Okay.
We have an observation deck on top of the roof. That's so you can come up. You can use the space. There's an open space at the top of that. And what you see here are the steps to go down to the bottom of the building. So this is a photograph of the students at top of the roof.
Do you have any other kind of landscape treatment apart from what we see on the images?
No. You mean in front we have all the greenery that we've done as a buffer. Of course, we had to plant the trees. As you saw, there was nothing there. So they haven't become mature, but they're all indigenous trees, of course, and they're supposed to mature to become canopy trees. So all the trees that we've selected are canopy trees. So this is because it just completed quite recently. In fact, it's just been operation this year.
Then you mentioned the view corridors and the streets. We can see the one in the center that's open with the stairs.
Yeah.
How about the others? Did you keep them as well?
Yes, all the view corridors are maintained.
And they are open outdoor space?
They are open outdoor spaces, yes.
Thank you.
Just following up on this one, the view. I like the fact that you had a green roof and it's accessible. Given our very hot tropical climate, what's the reason why you do not put plantings like trees on the roofscape? Because I believe this is not going to be very well spent unless it's only in the evening or early morning. It's going to be very hot.
That's true, but the complexity of building the roof was that we had to create a lot of breaks on the rooftop itself to mitigate the soil from eroding and from the water, from controlling the water flow on the roof. So adding the trees would have added quite a big load on top of what is already an arching roof that's going across. So yes, it will be mostly used in the afternoons.
And also we have to bear in mind practicality and maintainability of having a large roof with a large cluster of trees. So we have to actually have a balance between structural consideration and actual use.
It's the university that maintains it. Actually, we had propagated the idea of doing food planting on top of the roof, which they can do. So not so much in terms of trees, but they can actually do food planting on top of the roof. So we had actually given that to the university, but the university is actually quite careful about to maintain it.
I mean, we've obviously all focused on the roof because that's the thing that you sold right from the start. Is there anything that you originally intended to do with the green roof that you have not delivered? Because I think, there's obviously green.
Yeah.
But is it doing what you wanted?
There were a couple of things. There was, on the roof, we wanted to have renewable energy, and we also had a wind turbine, etc., part of the roof design. But and as I said before, we actually looked at doing food planting on top of the roof as well, rather than just being a lawn going all the way up the building. but the university, let's say this, it's too far forward in pedagogy for even them, for Heriot Watt. Even in terms of the teaching spaces, we actually studied how much they can actually have the flexibility, openable, etc., all the rest of it. But Heriot Watt was sort of like, whoa, okay. So I think it was daring enough for them at this sort of stage.
Back to this teaching spaces. Although currently Heriot Watt has a certain restraint over going open planning or flexible spaces, we have designed this. The building can take in the future, should they want to have less partitions or open planning teaching areas, because we have large span areas within the building that spans 18 meters maximum at least, so that they could actually have a more flexible arrangement later in the future, because currently it's fairly conventional in the interior layout, which is cellular and lots of smaller classrooms. But the space, the architectural spaces design is actually, they have taken into account for future use.
For future, we've put in a total irrigation system on the roof. So should they want to convert later and think about doing planting, there's enough depth there for them to actually do food planting and all the rest of it. So for them to, as they sort of mature a little bit into the building, for them to convert and do that later, we've actually allowed for that. And we've allowed for the drainage. There's quite a lot of things that have gone into how to drain the roof to handle that. And we're of course collecting water. We're collecting as much as 2 days worth of water for the entire irrigation of the landscape.
I like the porosity that you have put in the building blocks below. And especially you said that you are taking care of the cross ventilation. What kind of rating do you get for your green index?
For building green index, actually the client only, because it's a developer build for the client, so they went for only certification on this building.
Thank you very much.